Russian President Putin has ordered troops into the Ukrainian separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk after recognizing them as independent. The move has been condemned as a violation of international law and Ukraine's territorial integrity. And it's stoking fear that Europe could be poised for the biggest military confrontation since World War II. My guest this week is Olha Stefanichyna, Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. She joins me online from Kiev.
Ukrainian territorial integrity includes the full territory of Ukraine, including the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk and Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Our military forces are prepared to make sure that no inch of Ukrainian land is occupied by separatists now officially supported by Russian forces.
Is it too late for a diplomatic solution? Can Ukraine count on its Western partners? And will it be forced to make major concessions to Russia, including scrapping its NATO aspirations to avert an all-out war? Join me for all that and more on Conflict Zone. Deputy Prime Minister Stefanichyna, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you so much for having this discussion today.
Moscow has ordered troops into the separatist regions of Donetsk and Luhansk after Putin recognized them as independent. Does this mean war?
Basically, the war started 80 years ago when Russia backed up separatists inspired by an ordinary Russian playbooks, invaded and basically occupied part of the territory of Ukraine. So what has happened yesterday has not came as a surprise to Ukraine. This is part of the ordinary playbook. We see that now the Georgian scenario has been applied and the copy-paste from the Georgian the order on Georgia has been issued yesterday. So we were prepared for this development, and we consider that the formalization of invasion has taken place yesterday.
We've heard the U.S. ambassador to the UN. We've heard others. She in particular told the Security Council at an emergency meeting that President Putin has torn up the Minsk agreement, that it is now in shreds. She also says we have been clear that we do not believe he will stop at that. Are you anticipating a broader invasion?
Absolutely. So what Putin is doing on a different type of situations, he's playing the salami slice process. He's cutting the slice and he's watching for reaction. So we understand that this would not be the end decision he's taken. Next decisions will follow. First of all, the ratification by State Duma of the decision. Then he will reach out his satellites like Belarus and other countries for the recognition, and then there will be a room for maneuver. And it's really important that the next step he's taken is depend totally on all of us. I mean, on the Europe and NATO allies and US, because he doesn't have the clear decision. He has the mapping of options now in front of him, and the way we can deter him by at least sanctions is depending on what would come next.
But not long ago, and I just want to put this into the broader context now, not long ago, your government had been calling for calm while the U.S. was warning of an imminent invasion, warning of war. You were saying that you didn't see it at the time. Did you get it wrong?
Well, basically what has happened yesterday, this has been a paper aggression on paper. Putin has been taken, and the armed forces of Russian Federation, which has formally revealed themselves tomorrow. These are the regular Russian army, which has been positioned on the Donetsk and Lugansk region for all the 8 years in a row. So this is like the non-new forces. But you should understand that it's really equally important to be cold-minded and to make a Ukrainian population feel more calm. And this is what we were calling for, even though we have never undermined the threats we are facing, and we have demonstrated the full military and political preparedness to any kind of scenario.
Let's drill down a little bit deeper into how your government might respond now, because Russia's ordering of troops into the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, keeping in mind that it's estimated you have nearly 200,000 troops on your borders. How will the Ukrainian forces respond?
First of all, we've been doing for quite a long time before the decision, which has been seen and revealed yesterday, our contingency planning. So each of the sector of Ukrainian administration has the contingency planning and full preparedness. We understand that we might also face assaults to the critical infrastructure, energy resources, massive disinformation, provocations, protests, and internal destabilizations. This is all the playbook. Yes.
But what does contingency planning mean in practical terms for the troops who are on the ground? I'm thinking, for example, do you think that the Russian troops will remain only on the territory that has been controlled by the separatist republics, or could they seek to capture the rest of the two Ukrainian enclaves whose territory they claim? And in that case, how would your troops who are there right now, how would they react?
So there's one clear position we all stand on, and it has given you a clear answer. So Ukraine is Ukrainian territorial integrity includes the full territory of Ukraine, including the regions of Lugansk and Donetsk and Autonomous Republic of Crimea. The Minsk process is now being within the part of the territory controlled by separatists. So no other options are considered. So Ukrainian territory is in its entirety there. Our military forces are prepared to make sure that no inch of Ukrainian land is occupied by separatists now officially supported by Russian forces. So this preparedness is there. But we understand that now, and you can see it by the recent statements of Russians following today, they manipulate with the scope of recognition of the independence, whether it would be within a separatist control area or within the whole territory of Lugansk and Donetsk. And again, putting pressure on Russia would be the decisive step, which would, let's say, lead to the final decisions Russians would take. But for us, it would change no situation, because we're clear in our position that it's our territory. It have always been our territory, and it will be our territory regardless any decision that Putin would take. But what is essential, that knowing that Ukraine will fight for its territorial integrity, now EU, NATO, US, and particularly Great Britain should impose severe individual sanctions to those who legitimized yesterday this decision to deter Russia from further military invasion.
You say that Ukraine will fight. There's some intelligence out there, there's some speculation that the Russians could be heading toward Kiev. Russia is, in fact, if that plan is executed, Russia is said to be planning a post-invasion arrest and assassination campaign in Ukraine of political figures and prominent individuals. Intelligence on possible targets has been shared with Ukraine and other partners. How do you feel right now? Do you feel fear for your safety?
Again, we of course follow closely the statements of Russian Federation. We all know very well inside Ukraine and abroad that Putin and his so-called administration are playing by the ordinary playbooks. Again, different scenarios are possible, like internal destabilization, military aggression, further invasion, and any other scenarios. We have this data.
No, but what I'm asking you is, do you personally fear for your safety? Have you seen these lists? Because reportedly the intelligence has been shared with the Ukrainians. Is your name on there? Do you fear it's on there?
Well, I think that in this moment of time, all of us who has committed ourselves to work in the government are doing their best. So and it's not time to think about that. But what we're thinking about that we are prepared for the different scenarios, and we understand that it's not only Ukraine who can now deter Russia. So Putin will go as far as he will be allowed, and it's very clear that everybody should understand. And now, when European Union is discussing the new sanctions, it's not time for linguistic acrobatics, speaking whether the invasion was enough to put any restrictions. It's clear that the Russian regular army is now on the territory of Ukraine, that we are threatened by further annexation of our territory. And the longer the linguistic gymnastics is taking place, the more freedom to reveal any scenario of the one you're mentioning is given to Putin himself.
Let's talk a little bit more about deterrence. As you've mentioned, Russia's latest moves have attracted international condemnation, immediate U.S. sanctions to halt U.S. business activity in the breakaway regions and ban import of all goods from those areas. You talked about linguistic gymnastics. Will these moves make a difference now?
Well, I'm talking now particularly about those sanctions which require the consensus of all member states of European Union to impose them, and everybody are looking for the decision which will be taken by EU. I think that first of all, as we have to react immediately, the severe individual sanctions to the Putin wallets, to those people, to each and every Russian official who has inspired the decision which has been taken by Putin yesterday, including the members of their family, mostly living in Europe. These individual sanctions and restrictions should be imposed to their assets, to their families, to their visas, and etc. And this would be the understanding that the individual response is there.
But I'm wondering, how you see the effectiveness of such a move, because in the past week, for example, the shelling in Donetsk and Luhansk has been dramatically escalating, according to the OSCE. Hundreds of ceasefire violations per day. President Zelensky has been calling on partners, as you're doing right now, Germany, the US, the EU, to put sanctions on Russia. But the clashes continue. This is not a sign of people worried about sanctions or international reaction. Do you really think that sanctions will stop Putin?
But so far, before the decision which has been taken yesterday, we had a clear mapping and a discussion on the implementations of the Minsk agreement, which provides for the relevant or not, but the instruments of the ceasefire and withdrawal of troops. And these discussions and the President Zelensky, President Macron, and Chancellor Scholz were addressing to Putin, thinking that he's the one who will be abiding by this format. But he has shown now a total negligence to any peaceful efforts which has been taken for the 8 years. So now is the day where we should think that maybe dialogue and discussions is not the right instrument to deter.
So, and I want to talk about the Minsk agreement a little bit later, but, Russia's recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent is being condemned, as we've been highlighting, as a violation of international law, the Minsk peace agreements, as you've highlighted, and your territorial integrity, just generally speaking. The U.S. has already said it will not send troops to fight in Ukraine, but rather to defend NATO territory. Germany, instead of sending defense equipment, sends helmets in a move that the mayor of Kiev calls a joke. What do you expect now from your partners, Germany, the EU, and the US, in terms of direct help on the ground?
As I was saying, this is the immediate and severe individual sanctions against those who should be held accountable. Second of all, Ukraine will use all acceptable and possible legal instruments to ensure that no step is taken to legalize further beyond Russian borders the decisions which has been taken. And here we would need, of course, support of our allies. We have no illusion that other military and armies will fight on our territory. And I think that the fight, the deterrence and defense Ukraine is committed to is more vocal than anything which might need it. But what we need now is no hesitation when it's time for action, when it's time to put a sanctions pressure, when it's time to take a decision to give Ukraine access to the finances which would stabilize the economy. So it's no time for small discussions. It's time for survival of our country.
Okay, not time for small discussions, not time for small moves.
I think that there's like one very important message I'd like to address, given the fact that this discussion will be available to a broader audience. It's a very mistakable understanding that the discussions which has been taken now about the territorial integrity and sovereignty in Ukraine, Ukrainian, European, Euro-Atlantic aspirations is the discussions between the politicians. Any hesitation would be the betrayal of Ukrainian people. This is the Ukrainian nation which stands for its territorial integrity. And these are not the political talks. So any failure to preserve unity and to ensure the decisive actions would be something which will be failure to address the hopes of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian army, first of all. So, it would be up to those leaders to judge whether they have been compatible with their actions as strong as they were compatible with their words addressing Ukrainian people.
And among those leaders, I mean, there has been a flurry of diplomacy in recent days, also more diplomacy planned in the next days, of course. Putin ultimately, in that diplomacy, continues to try and get delivery on blocking Ukraine from joining NATO. He says, and I'm quoting here, if Russia faces a threat like admitting Ukraine into NATO, the threat would be multiplied. Are your NATO ambitions now on the chopping block?
I can say that this is not something that he cares about. Basically, all of us were listening for yesterday 1 hour speech he delivered. And speaking about NATO has taken less than 10 minutes in all of the speech. All the rest of the speech was dedicated to the inaccessibility of Ukrainian path towards democratic European nation. And I can assure you that it's not about your enlargement to NATO, because basically just take a look around. Like a year ago when NATO held a summit of the leaders with the President Biden, it was confirmed by all 30 allies that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. No word we heard from Putin. Before President Biden was elected, State Secretary Pompeo made a tour around Eastern Europe and Baltics, signed the comprehensive enhanced military agreement on cooperation with them. No word has been done from Russians.
But isn't there fear that it might be used as a bargaining chip? And I'd just like to highlight, for example, the French President Emmanuel Macron telling reporters on his flight to Moscow that, quote, Finlandization or non-alignment of Ukraine was one of the models that was on the table for diffusing tensions with Russia. Are you not concerned that you might be pushed into such an arrangement in order to satisfy Russia's security concerns?
First of all, I was talking about Ukrainian people, but also all of the leaders you were mentioning, they have their nations and their people when they come back to their capitals. And it will be up to them to judge how strong and how much leadership these leaders were showing in their commitment. And it is a very easygoing way to speak on behalf of the other nations and to put any, let it down approach. I think that any hesitating rhetoric towards Euro-Atlantic aspirations of our country, this is not something that you would hear from Ukraine. But anything like that you hear from European leaders undermines the NATO as itself and the leadership in European Union itself. So this is a weak position to our side.
Yeah, but speaking about your side, I mean. Zelensky pointed out recently when it came to NATO, the fact that NATO always says the doors are open. Zelensky's response is open doors are good, but we need open answers, not closed questions for years. It sounds like this is a leader seeing NATO membership slipping through his fingers.
We see, and he basically, my president has the full right to declare these positions because over the last 3 years, we've done so much to make sure that we comply with the NATO standards, that we utilize all the possible instruments, and we were contributing severely to the capability of the allies in terms of fighting against hybrid threats and cybersecurity. Our armed forces were engaged in a huge amount of trainings, and we have proven ourselves that our commitment to reforms agenda and our commitment to strengthening our capability in terms of the security and defense is rather strong. And our political commitment towards your Atlantic aspiration has united all the political forces, and the support of Ukrainian population grown more than 20% plus in that regard. So basically, what else is needed to make sure that we have this answer? I think that the least NATO allies can do is start looking for the options how to make their promise implemented. It's not even about saying that Ukraine will become the NATO member tomorrow. It's about taking the decision to start the discussion.
Absolutely. Let's turn back to the situation on the ground and what is, practical right now and what the way forward might be. The UN, for example, has been calling for parties to make meaningful progress on implementation of the Minsk Agreement, something that you've also highlighted earlier in our conversation. But Russia's recognition of the two separatist regions has effectively killed off the Minsk Agreement, hasn't it?
Well, I think that it is also very important to be very cautious in that regard, because Russia has been for numerous time trying to force Ukraine to go through the implementation of the political part of Minsk without prior ensuring the security part of Minsk. And this was the pressure for implementation, while Ukraine has trying to engage all the N4 format for the discussion. And any unilateral statement from Ukraine about the withdrawal from the Minsk agreement would really serve as a good argument for Russia to further produce their engine of propaganda. So we see that this is a clear violation of the commitments, and further steps within the existing formats, like Normandy format, should be agreed between three sides, at least Ukraine, France, and Germany.
And we've heard Zelensky saying that he remains committed to a political and diplomatic settlement, but again to the Minsk agreement, because it hasn't made much, if any, progress in the past years, and it wasn't ultimately popular with your people. The vast majority of Ukrainians wanted the deal rejected or amended. Was implementing Minsk ever an option for you, or was it dead on arrival?
Well, of course, but again, there's like both a political and a security part of Minsk. So first, the security part, when Ukraine has its territory controlled back, cleansed from the Russian separatists, and in security conditions where Ukraine can hold free and fair elections based on the OSCE ODIHR principles. And all of these elements, further political, they're impossible without security, ensuring security on these territories. And I think that the most important thing in that regard, and it's basically revealed now, is that for Ukraine, Minsk means to restore this sovereignty, and we were doing our best to preserve this goal, while for Russia, it was a tool to cripple Ukraine's sovereignty for all of this time. And what has happened yesterday is clearly showing that this was the ultimate goal they had for all of the 8 years.
We also heard Putin, for example, give a fiery speech on Monday, making the case that Ukraine is by history and by makeup an integral part of Russia. He says that the country's east is ancient Russian lands. When you look at the situation strategically and more broadly speaking, and if you had to put yourself in Putin's shoes, do you think that this is the moment that he has chosen to avenge the Cold War's end and reestablish Ukraine as a sphere of influence?
Well, I think he's too old for this. and what we have to think now, what will come after Putin. And now I'm, of course, as a normal Ukrainian, very much experienced in the different Ukrainian, in different Russian propaganda myths. I would just show you a picture, and then I can show you that. This is how Ukraine looks and since 1996 until 108. And this is how Russia looked. You should just see it. So Russia has never existed before Ukraine has become there. And it's really important. We should not go into this discussion. This is not the time. This is about being decisive to make sure that we can plan our future, not only Ukraine.
The question though is, I mean, we've talked about potential diplomatic solutions, sanctions, deterrence. Ultimately, if Vladimir Putin seems bent on creating a greater Russia, what hope is there for Ukraine?
Well, we do not care which kind of Russia Putin is building. We know which kind of Ukraine are we building. We've been fighting for our independence for centuries, independence from Russian Empire, and this is the independence we fought for. And in 1991, when then U.S. president came here to Ukraine, and he said, he says his famous speech, Chicken Kyiv, he said, you should not act. You should not provoke Russia to preserve peace. And we acted decisively. We gained our independence, and we will never step back from that. So, and I think that this is the best weapon against autocracies, and making sure that Ukraine can build the country Ukrainian people want is something which is essential. And this would immediately affect Russian people who really also want to build their country, not the one presented yesterday.
Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, thank you so much for joining us on Conflict Zone. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.